Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Councilmember Jawando, for your words. I think that all of us up here are familiar with Coach Fofo. Some of us are good friends with him. Coach Fofo is the founder of the Elite Soccer Youth Development Academy, which uses soccer as a vehicle to mentor and guide our young people. In 2019, the community and the entire county council rose up to prevent Coach Fofo from being deported under Trump's horrific immigration policies. He recently reached out to my office for help because he is facing potential displacement due to an 8% increase in his rent. A letter from him is part of your packet today. Quote, "I can't afford to continue to pay because the monthly income I bring into my home is not close to what I pay in rent." And I want to emphasize that the reason that we wrote the Home Act the way we did is because Coach Fofo's story, including the percent increase that has made his housing costs unaffordable, is not unique in Montgomery County. It is representative. Since temporary rent stabilization was lifted last August, evictions have skyrocketed. Let's look at our most recent month for which we have data, February. In February 2022, a year ago, there were 35 evictions scheduled. Last month, 380. 380. We have got to pass protections that will put the brakes on this escalating crisis. In crafting this bill, we worked to understand the needs of county employees, teachers, counselors, custodial staff, bus drivers, many of whom cannot afford to live in the county where they work. 3 of the 40 letters of support in our bill packets today come from MCEA, SEIU Local 500, and McGeo. We worked with and heard from community organizations who serve renters like CASA and Shepherd's Table and African Communities Together, all reporting a landslide of tenants suffering from unaffordable rent increases and real fear about the lack of relief in sight. And we worked with policy experts who've crafted successful and court-tested rent stabilization measures locally and across the country. So what is needed to provide stability in Montgomery County? Well, nearly half of our county's renters are considered cost burdened, meaning they're spending 30% or more of their income on housing and may have difficulty paying for food, transportation, and other necessities. Nearly a quarter of our renters spend half of their income or more on housing. And of those, the income of most of them is 30% or less of our AMI, area median income. An enormous and disproportionately Black and brown segment of our residents cannot just absorb annual rent increases of 6%, 8%, 10%. We need to acknowledge that for this significant portion of our residents, of our constituents, receiving an increase like that is tantamount to an eviction notice on their door. And what does living on that tightrope look like? Take Alexis Kurtz, who wrote, "I'm a public school teacher who's recently experienced a 7% rent increase. I've also faced mold, oil paint melting in the bathroom and dripping down our faces when we shower, and flooding during heavy rain. My rent is nearly 50% of my paycheck, and that's with a roommate. I'm lucky enough to be a middle school teacher at a school that gives free breakfast, which I usually eat for lunch. If my rent increases again, I'm going to have to move out of MoCo and get a job somewhere else." Liliana Velasquez at Georgian Way wrote, "It is challenging to pay a 5% rent increase. If rent continues to increase the way that it is, I do not know how we will sustain ourselves. Anytime our wages increase, high rent prices, utilities, and the cost of goods offset it. The situation is such that we are currently looking for another home outside of Montgomery County." If renters are going to have a chance to get ahead, rent increases can't be set up to outpace wage increases. And if we want to preserve Montgomery County's diversity, we must set a cap that accounts for the financially tenuous state of thousands of rent-burdened, disproportionately Black and brown residents. The last letter I'm going to share a snippet of is from Mary Uri Avila, who I happened to meet after our council town hall, which fell on a particularly traumatic evening for her. "Dear Kristen, I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm from Honduras and a resident of Wheaton. You helped me find shelter after a town hall a few weeks ago. I cannot describe how much that meant to my beautiful 5-year-old daughter and me. Unfortunately, I am back to being unhoused. As you know, I was evicted from my home 2 weeks ago. I watched as my personal belongings and life were dumped on the street in just under 15 minutes. My 5-year-old girl played innocently in the yard. No words can describe the feeling. The best I can come up with is that I had little value as a human being for the first time. I fell behind on rent after an increase of 6%. A cap that is higher than the rate of wage growth, significantly above the rate of inflation, does not provide the stability and predictability for renters that we are being asked to deliver, that our community is crying out for. And a high cap isn't necessary. It is possible to set a lower cap while protecting landlords' constitutional and well-deserved right to a fair return on their investment. You may refer to letters in the packet from landlords who also support the Home Act. In other good news, there is plenty of evidence that rent regulations do not need to have a negative impact on development. That case studies pointing to rising rents following rent stabilization were the result of poorly written policy. And that rent stabilization, done right, is reliably effective at curbing displacement. We have the tools. We have the community mandate. And we have an agreement that something needs to be done. So let's really do something. I am grateful that some of my colleagues have, separate from the bill introduced for clarity, put forward budget priorities to increase funding for rental assistance, affordable housing development, and home ownership programs. I think those measures will receive strong support during the budget process. In fact, the Home Act includes a measure to raise revenue for affordable housing. And I'll be introducing a bill shortly, which would fund nearly all of the rental assistance my colleagues are hoping to find budget space for. So I'm excited to work on those budget priorities together. And to conclude, I'm grateful to my colleagues for engaging in this debate. I'm hopeful that over the coming weeks, we can agree on a policy that provides stability, predictability, and dignity to renters. I'm grateful to council staff. Dean did an incredible job in the weeds with us. Thank you to Councilmember Jawando and County Executive Mark Elrich. We worked closely on this bill together. And I'm especially grateful to the residents and organizations all across our county who helped us craft the Home Act. Thank you. Thank you for your time and dedication to addressing our housing crisis. If we go too low, we can reevaluate and adjust. If we go too high right now, we will displace residents. And we cannot undo that. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back to you.